So we went nearly 19 years without that. We kept up with trends in community corrections and things like that. But after I think the lack of my understanding of a contingency plan of retirements and some operational issues, the commission decided, spoke with me and decided that we would put the community corrections back under the Department of Corrections, and I accepted that responsibility. As you know, that this is our program. So I think it's very important to understand that this is the Shawnee County program, and the majority of our funds, and I'm going to have Tim come up because he lives this every day, and talk about, because you guys approve our budget earlier for 2021. I believe we're in the fiscal year of 2021 for community corrections because we work off the grant funds with the state of Kansas. So I'm going to, I first wanted that, I appointed Tim Phelps in that position, and made some corrections. I want to have Tim come up real quick on the budgets we have and what is funded. And then I'm going to Kansas statute that I've been recently talking with. I gave that information to you guys back in March. So Tim.
Good morning, Commissioners. Tim Phelps, Shawnee County Department of Corrections. In simple figures, the ISP operation operates at this point on 3 funding tracks. We ask for grant funds, and they're given to us if we're successful on 3 funding tracks. One is the block grant, they call it, and that is the primary adult grant fund that the state of Kansas puts forward for $124 and 30 cents. That pays predominantly salaries for 14 employees, and then since it has not continued to grow, instead we've had to try to shift almost all of it to salaries and rent, and then there's some dollars left over for trying to do some office supplies and then some low-level programming options. But when I say low-level, I mean less than 1% of what probably is required to do that job properly. So that's one stream. The second stream, they call it the Behavioral Health Program, and it is a much smaller pool of money, and you can compete for funds out of that. And we were awarded in fiscal 21 $119,566. The bulk of that goes to pay the salaries and equipment for what they call a care coordinator with RADAC, Regional Alcohol and Drug Addiction Center. I believe that's what that stands for. And also pay for what they call a recovery coach that goes around in 3rd Judicial District and 2nd Judicial District and help those who have substance abuse problems get connected to some services in the community, and they help us with assessments. It's not nearly enough, and this year I asked to double that number of people and the funding for it. They denied me. That doesn't mean I won't keep asking, but they denied me for fiscal 21. We did get a slight increase in the second use of that money, and that is what they call vouchers, and that is some dollars to pay for if someone needs some medication mental health medication, we can help fund some of that so they can get some medication and some programming that they can go to for either if they're a sex offender or they're a domestic violence person or they have mental health problems or they have substance abuse problems. So again, it's a small dollar amount. It's only $21,600, but that's $10,000 more almost than they gave us last year, so we're making some progress there. The third is all juvenile, and it's called the Graduated Sanctions Grant. And we received $1,571,107 in that award, but only $732,000 and change of that goes to our operation. The rest of it passes through to prevention dollars for community activity, juvenile intake and assessment services, and some stuff with Boys and Girls Club and Kansas Children's Services League. And it also, this year, we increased by just over $300,000 for some additional community programs on the juvenile side. So we don't get that money ourselves, we pass it through to other organizations in the community, then we oversee how they handle it to make sure that we're making the best use of that money. So that is the financial structure for fiscal 21, which runs from July 1st this year to June 30th next year. So I do want to say, though, before Director Cole comes up, and I think that this context is helpful, it's been a wild ride this year at Community Corrections, because I too was working for DOC when it was broken off in 2000, and in the intervening 19 years, the Department of Corrections Detention Center was beat about the head and neck from every source that could be identified to teach us to do things more professionally. Teach us to build better policies, better practices, better auditing systems, better regulation, much more disciplined and professional behavior in throughout the staff ranks. In that same period of time, I have to testify from examination that ISP was coasting. ISP was not focusing on what funding they needed, so their staff numbers kept decreasing even though their population kept increasing. And so we now are, because of COVID, we're down to about 700 and some clients, but they were as high as 880 some at the end of last year. And I expect we'll get back to that once they start sentencing people again and that engine gets up and going. So that has caused there to be a massive, out of control, I think, caseload that's more than double the state average. And that means that they're not paying proper attention to each case because they're just shuffling papers to try to deal with the volume. And I think that is an issue that we need to try to identify the cause of it, identify some solutions to it so that we can start doing what ISP was originally designed to do, and that is correct behavior through treatment and programming and stop the cycle of recidivism of getting these felons back into the criminal justice system. So with that, unless you have questions, I'll defer to Director Cole for the next stage.
You know, one of the issues I've always had with ISP, and it's not that anybody can fix it, but it's just a matter of what life is. ISP is the last stop before prison. And so if a person is sentenced on a felony case, they don't always go directly to ISP. I mean, they might have a stop before they get to ISP, but ISP is the last stop before a person is sentenced to prison. Our money for community corrections is determined by our outcome. The higher outcome, i.e. not going to prison, the more money we get. But it almost is paying us to look the other way sometimes, where it feels like you're getting paid to look the other way and to pass people through, that because if we were holding people accountable for their actions, then we get penalized from the state. And so it's a catch-22. And that's not to say anybody's done that, but I mean, community corrections is held accountable. We have I'm glad we have a top to bottom review because it was well needed. But it's a catch-22 from the state. If we hold offenders responsible and send them, file the reports, they would have their revocation hearing, look at a prison sentence, then the state says, well, you didn't succeed. If we don't, we're putting the community at risk. And so either way, we're gonna get dinged. And just an observation.
So, Commissioner, if I may, and with full respect, because I don't know where your information derived.
Right.
I imagine it's through conversation with people.
Right.
But success rate is one factor.
Okay.
And in fact, it is a reducing factor. That is, it's getting less and less weight over time.
Good.
I don't think, if we were being honest with ourselves in that operation, I don't think it should ever really be what we measure anyway.
Good.
Because success versus, or go to prison versus not go to prison, if you see it correctly, is more a judicial function than it really is an ISP function.
Agree completely.
ISP's job is to identify risk, address the risk through programming and treatment, and then put structure around each of those clients so that they can't waver, and at the same time, we're helping them. That combination is supposed to be what we do. We have the two highest areas of risk for our clientele are drug and alcohol or substance abuse. It is actually the second highest. The first highest is education and employment. We do very little to address the drug and alcohol unless they happen to be a Senate Bill 123 client and then the money's coming from another source, and they could spend up to $16,000 a year to deal with that client. A year. If they're not Senate Bill 123, they can spend maybe $100. It's out of whack.
Right.
You can't address the problem. So that's one factor. The second thing is that we do virtually nothing unless it already exists with this client. We do nothing with education and employment. We don't have manpower to say, here's some options for you. Get out there and do it. I'm going to check on you, make sure you're doing it. I'm going to keep you in the saddle. We don't have the resources, so it hasn't been done. And that's why the recidivism just keeps going in a cycle and people give passes.
And I completely refreshing to hear you say that. Again, my perception, if it was wrong, was that, there was more weight put on the success rate
Right.
than there should have been. And so it's very refreshing to hear you say that, especially since Shawnee County has a workforce development issue. We have a need for jobs. With, the banning of the box, removing
Right.
some of the restrictions for felons to not be able to be gainfully employed. If we really want to stop recidivism, it's getting people employment
Right.
so they have alternatives.
And that's why in the middle of this last year, I saw an opportunity with KU to join forces with them and start a program to get females that are coming out of incarceration into a training program so they can learn technology skills and then they can get into the workforce. And we've had graduates from that from the first round, and we're getting geared up to do the second round now.
I mean, I just look at,
So-
with everything we're building, between the Mars, the Home Depot, the Target,
Right.
the Frito-Lay, the Walmart, there's times where we will be in a JADO meeting and I wonder, it's great that we're adding 500 more jobs, but where are the people coming from?
Right. Absolutely.
And so if we have the ability to rehabilitate, reduce recidivism, and fill that workforce gap, by all means.
Right, I agree. So unless you have any other questions, I'll let Director Cole start the other issue here. So, thank you.
Thank you, Tim.
You made a very good point, Commissioner. When we started upping our reentry areas at the jail, one of the first things that we found is that a person is 70% more likely to succeed or not be arrested if they have meaningful employment. And so Tim has identified that. One of the things that I think, not only is it the overview, but the other part of our presentation is that one of the things that I asked Tim to do is not only to do a thorough review, and I attended some of their meetings and I talked to staff and things like that, And, you know, I've empowered Tim and their staff to do their job with not me hovering over the top of them. I don't want them feeling like, you know, the strong arm of the jail, which there was that concern at the very beginning. And I wanted them to feel that they're going to get their due respect, and they deserve that. But one of the things that Tim brought to my attention was a statute, and I'm going to have Tim come back up here and explain this statute, that when it came to the funding, because there was a lot of things that just really bothered me about the funding, their formulas and, you know, how do you do this, and, you know, because it comes from certain things, I can't, you know, I can't look at a total community corrections budget. I have to look at 3 separate things. I can't just say this, you know, I have to, you know, so the best way to say it is that I just can't take money out of juvenile and put it over and apply it to adult. It can't happen. And Tim brought to my attention a Kansas statute that we met right off the bat with Betty and Jim Crow. And basically, the gist of the statute states that counties are to support and provide financial support to the community corrections operation. It's a statute. And as much as, and Tim went into it even as much as matching what the county or what is provided by the state. And I'm going to have Tim explain that. One of the things concerned me because it's in the very beginning, Shawnee County paid for the whole thing, the whole operation many years ago. And then all of a sudden KDOC came in and started having the grant. With the expectations of the grant says is we're going to give you grant money, but we're expecting the county to put in money, have some skin in the game as well. As far as I know, Shawnee County has never provided any matching or any supporting funds for community corrections that I'm aware of, and at least Tim and I could not find any. And when we talked to Jim and we met with Betty regarding this, Jim had mentioned, okay, first of all, what are other counties doing? Well, the major counties, they're all participating. They're all following the statute. Jim was concerned about that, okay, we're not following that statute. The next question comes up is money. You know, we get roughly $2 million or whatever it is from the Kansas Department of Corrections. And I'm not here today to ask for $2 million for the county to match. What we are trying to do is we looked at our needs, because I asked him, I said, look, in doing this and talking with Betty and talking with Jim, is we're trying to put together a plan that truly meets our needs at this point. And the lack of resources we have come in staff. We need to have funding for 2 more third judicial adult ISP officers. We need to have a staffing for 1 more Judicial District 2. And then we're looking for a 4th staff member to be a program coordinator to actually implement these programs. When I looked at this, and again, I'm going to have Tim come up and explain more about the statute and the needs of our plan. It was about 200,000, or a little over 200,000. 205 was for the staff. The other remaining part, about 200 and over that, was for the necessary programs that we just identified for education, unemployment or employment and things like that. And trying to come to the commission and being able to show the Kansas Department of Corrections in good faith that we are supporting. Now, I'm not aware Kansas Department of Corrections is knocking on the door and saying why, but I will tell you that they are scrutinizing more than ever during the meetings of the funds that they have. And they're asking counties, well, what part is the counties participating in? And we've been quiet and nobody's asked about Shawnee County. But I want Tim to come up and explain a little bit of the process of what we went through. We had planned with Betty to have meetings in March over this. With the COVID thing with all that came up and all the meetings, I had Tim send Betty, Jim, and all of the commission. You should have all got that, the letter and the memorandum regarding what the statute is and the requests that we have, and things like this. I'll be honest with you, I was unaware of the statute. Jim Crow was unaware of this statute. Betty Greiner was unaware of this statute. Tim Phelps was unaware of this statute until I asked him to go in and do the job and to go in there. This is not to be disrespectful to any board of any prior commission. This isn't disrespectful to any administration at the community corrections or finance or anything like that. I think it's something through, to be honest with you, I'll make Tim the bad guy. Through his due diligence, we found this. But rather than have you all get caught off guard, I immediately went to Betty and Jim and said, uh-oh, we've got this. What do we do? How do we approach it? And that's where we're here. And Betty has worked right along with us. And again, I think, thank you for that. So I'm going to step back and have Tim explain a little bit more of the statute, the breakdown of the 500,000. Tim?
Thank you, Commissioners. I'd like to say, because it's been an interesting ride with learning this stuff and then trying to find a way to deal with it, that Betty and her office have been spectacular to deal with, trying to find the way to present this to you with some kind of an orderly fashion. And I don't know if you have the documents with you, but it shows one of the things that the document that I was.
Not with me.
Okay.
I never.
I'm sorry, I'll get those for
that's
you.
okay.
I'm
I'm on the right page, but there's nothing there. So-
I'm sorry, we will get those to you. In prior years, we have not had anything,
Yeah,
so.
that's all right, that's all right.
The simple thing is that I want to articulate, and I think it was a good idea that they proposed, is that I present the budget to you that shows everything that we've received, both grant and what we're requesting with Shawnee County, for Shawnee County funds. And then at the bottom, it lets you see the percentage relationship. And so of the funds, like Director Cole indicated, I'm seeking 4 additional staff members. That's not the end. I'm trying to do something with our caseload, and I'm trying to do something about getting into gear with our programming so that we can start being more effective and having a true success measurement instead of the more arbitrary one of did the judge send them to prison or not. No matter how many times they recidivate while they're on probation, do they still not go to prison? Okay, then we win, which is not a very functional, considering what our job is, it's not a functional way to measure it. I'm not trying to drag anyone through history, because certainly no one in this room had anything to do with this. Before 1978, Shawnee County paid the whole bill, because the different counties across the state wouldn't get on the same page about how to do the business of community corrections. They asked the state legislature to draft a uniform policy for community corrections. So in 1978, they passed the Community Corrections Act, and it went into effect 1980, ironically the very same year that Shawnee County decided to have an independent corrections department. But in that intervening period between 78 and 80, the different counties were supposed to develop a strategy so how they could implement the new statute. And in the statute it says, because basically we're making you do some automated things or some standardized things, we're willing, it says we may provide funding to support you. And then a little bit later down it says, counties shall meet or exceed the contribution from the state. And if the county doesn't, then the next year, KDOC can reduce your budget award equal to the amount you did not match. So essentially, if they decided to, they could pull the plug and I'd have $0 for 2021 if they strictly applied the statute, because no funding was coming from Shawnee County in fiscal 20. So that's just a direct application of the statute. I didn't know about it until I was in a meeting for the directors that we have quarterly with state DOC, and somebody started talking about contribution. And I was just thinking, okay, maybe some counties do it, maybe they don't. Do they mean soft contributions or hard contributions? And so I started inquiring with some of my peers, and then they said, well, I think there's a statute about it. It's about the best I could get. So I went and read the whole Community Corrections Act, and I stumbled upon the statute, and then I reported it out. So that's a little bit about how that came to pass. Folks, independent of that, we're in trouble at ISP. Our caseloads are too big. We're doing nothing for programming. All we're doing is maintaining, and that pretty poorly, in my professional opinion. So my design in proposing a budget to begin the process of getting contribution from the county was to see, okay, what are my biggest holes and how do I start plugging them? And so this budget is designed to get me some additional staff, get me some space to put them in, get me supplies to get them operating, and those three, what they call the MSAs, cover those questions. I'm happy to go into detail about what each of the parts of the 500 and change thousand I requested, but that's the structure of it essentially. And I honestly think that it's a good beginning, but if we're going to really do something about the population and the management of them, it's got to be a continued process, not just because of the statute, but because of our operation.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
A couple of questions off the bat. Since we are looking at workforce development as being that first kind of key piece over drugs and alcohol, would it make sense for us to make a request through JADO that there would be Go Topeka funds allocated, since a portion of Go Topeka's purpose is workforce development? Does that count as a county contribution since it's sales tax, or does that not count as a county contribution because it did not come directly from the county?
Well, it's a good question. Certainly, it would be listed as a contribution outside of KDOC because it's not limited to just one or the other. And I could certainly put in the narrative of my comprehensive plan that I build for next year where I have to report these things. I would put into the narrative that it was initiated by the commission to provide some support.
I know that, again, asking and just trying to, since we're looking at a pretty hefty cost of, $500,000, looking at if we would be able to offset any of that from work that's already being done by the Greater Topeka Partnership, Go Topeka, through workforce development. If not, then, pull that one off the list. The other question, our number one contributor to the jail is the city of Topeka. We have a city of Topeka probation office. I know that we'd had some, just again, off-the-cuff discussions at different points about looking at potentially approaching the city of Topeka for consolidation of their probation office into community corrections. Would we be able to look at maybe, again, that's adding more to what we're already looking at, a stress situation, but looking at that city of Topeka contribution to help increase the work that we're doing and maybe decrease the amount that we would be coming up with $500,000? Or is it just completely, that's a completely different topic and not really what we need to be discussing right now?
Well, my first apprehension there is that community corrections is unique to all other forms of what people generally call community or pre-release or post-release supervision.
Mm-hmm.
They're only municipal. They only manage municipal cases.
Right.
Just like court services only manages misdemeanor and pretrial management or supervision.
I agree completely, but a lot of times we're dealing with the same individuals.
Right, and when we deal with the same individual with court services, they do this. And oftentimes, they'll do this even before they know for sure whether the person will be assigned to us. So we'll end up doing their LSIRs, their assessments, or their Senate Bill 123 assessments. We'll end up basically helping them because no one really yet knows whether that person's going to be convicted of a charge that can send them to us.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know that I would necessarily resist such a thing from the ISP side, but I suspect we would get a lot of resistance from them because they'd feel some requirement to reciprocate.
Okay, just again, trying to look at, if we're looking at $500,000 additional new expense to our budget,
Right.
To meet this obligation, what other funding pools we may be able to draw from?
Absolutely. I understand that.
Tim, how many of these people are these in for drug-related?
We generally think, what our numbers show, which incidentally is another problem that I found that I'm working feverishly to fix is lack of statistics. But what we generally understand is 20% of our population are what we call Senate Bill 123s, but we don't pay for their programming. We pay for their supervision. We are in charge of that, but we send the bills to the state under Senate Bill 123 because they qualify for treatment under those. So none of that comes or even impacts our DOC budget. That's a whole separate fund under the Sentencing Commission, part of the state government. But we don't have any ability, if they don't qualify for 123, we don't have any ability to do much of any kind of funding for treatment or programming, which then hamstrings us and makes it difficult other than say, hey, go do it. And if you don't, we're going to put you in jail, but we're not giving them any helps.
Excuse me, Commissioner, can I make a
Yes.
comment? When we're talking about county funding, the county has provided all through the years with soft cost funding through indirect costs. You know, they use our accounting system, they use my staff, the counselor's office, all of that. We are in the process, as we talked about earlier, of a new study, and we have the draft that we do provide funding through all of these indirect costs. It's just not the hard costs that where you see the dollars being spent out of that.
And then- I'm
And
sorry.
we will have updated numbers on that here real soon.
Tim, there's nowhere in the grant that it says 20% or 50% participation.
The grant doesn't, the statute does.
The
The
statute
statute says
says
meet or
50.
exceed.
Or matching. is that-
Match or, yeah, it says meet or exceed the contribution of the state. But I also want to just, to close the loop with what Ms. Greiner told you, in anticipation that she was working to try to get a more accurate number, but I also didn't want to just put nothing down for contribution. I put 200,000 down for fiscal '21, so that it would demonstrate that we are doing things and we recognize that they are providing those soft dollar supports. So once I know more accurately what that calculation will be, it'll absolutely be included, and that can help fill the gap up to match. So I'm not suggesting otherwise, but that's where we are right now on that number.
Okay.
I don't have anything else.
Anything else? Commissioner Cook, I see the wheels turning over there.
Well, I just know that, Tim, this is something that you're gonna need to see immediately, for your peace of mind, knowing that I don't want to wake up one morning and have a letter drop on my desk that says, all that money that you're relying on, yeah, it's gone. And so in order for you to make sure that you can sleep at night and make sure that you're not gonna have any issues when you come into work, you will want to make sure that county contribution is listed, it's there, you can point at it, document it, and not have to be able to justify it to the state.
That is true, and part of my personality is I hate histrionics. I like more practical solutions. But I do know that I just, last week, I was reviewing the governor's allotments that she's proposing to reduce to help fill the 1.3 billion or so that they're anticipating the gap being for their budget.
Right.
And she had proposed 700 million worth of allotments, and 2 of those, if they're taken, could have a direct impact on our primary operation being able to continue past fiscal '21. The graduated sanctions money, a portion of that, and the block grant money.
See, this is my again, and not to get on a soapbox, but when we did the Senate bill for the juveniles, we reduced the number of juveniles in the corrections
Right.
with the promise that we were going to fund programs for juveniles in the
Right.
community.
Right, and I think I failed to make that specific point earlier. 300,000 that we increased this year is coming from that fund.
Okay.
And that's one of the funds that they're looking at pulling, yanking out from under KDOC, the money that's been saved up from the savings of Senate Bill 367. So
mean-
you're exactly right, but for '21, we've got some of those dollars that were allocated to us.
Okay, but if they yank it away,
They
they will
won't.
have gotten rid of the funding of the juveniles and the funding of the programs.
Right, right. You're absolutely right about that analysis.
And then it becomes just a straight pass down onto your local jurisdictions.
Right. Or those, because all of those are support community funds. They just go away, and then the effect is the kids pour into the justice system because they're not getting, they're getting such a reduced opportunity for help on the outside.
Mhm.
Yes.
Okay.
All right, thank you.
Commissioners, again, thank you very much. We put a lot of hard work in our budget preparation, but I will also tell you that we understand we're not the only department in Shawnee County. We're a team player. We understand that there's more priorities than just the jail, and that we have a community-wide concern for Shawnee County, is that we have to look at everybody. And I know if there was a money tree out front, Betty would have found it, and I always bring that up.
Yeah,
But we do
I'm
know
keep-
that
I
Shawnee
still
County
love-
has needs outside the jail. What I bring to you is always try to bring you our requests based off of anticipated costs, court costs, statute-driven, and things like that. So with that, I'll stand for any questions, and if there are none, I thank you and appreciate, and wish you all have a good day.
Thank you very much, Brian.
Thank you.
Tim, Kim? Or Eve?